All right. So, first thing is that I've made just a little adjustment in the schedule, and I hope it doesn't cause anyone any grief. But we were scheduled to review the exam on Wednesday of this week, and I realized that the pivotal day to be able to get ready for your next project is modifying databases with VBA. That's the last thing you need for that one. So I've just switched these two so that you've got over this weekend to be able to start that project if you are so inclined to do that. If you had some kind of plans, and that's make it so you can't, review the exam with us, and come see me in my office and we can review the exam individually for you. So we're on March 20th, and today is about importing data from databases. There's a file to download, and we've got a couple of other links to deal with here. So let's just go ahead and take a look at relational database management overview. Oh, how comfortable are you with working with relational databases on a scale of 0 to 5? You've done a lot, got a lot of experience. 5, like nothing past IS 201 would be 0 or 1. Okay, so I got some people I got a lot of folks that are on zeros here. Okay, and then I saw a couple that were double 0. I'm twice as 0 as other people are. All right, thank you. So, just a little background on database management. So the whole idea behind database management system is that we've got some set of data that we need to protect, and we need to be able to make available to our people when they need it. And it has integrity. And so how are we going to manage that shared data that's an important resource to the organization? And the answer is we're going to have a piece of software that's referred to as either a relational database management system, or sometimes just referred to as a database engine. Also sometimes goes by the term back end. That's kind of a strange name for it, but like the back end of our system is just what manages the data. Now, this software is always non-visual software. There's no user interface that you see. It's all kind of managed from some other kind of a program we'll talk about in a minute called the front end. Or the application software. But the database engine is responsible for several really important things for protecting or dealing with our data. So it's in charge of data security, meaning we want to make sure that only the people that are allowed to access this data access the data, and that is the responsibility of the database engine. Data integrity, that means that this data is internally consistent. In other words, when we say that this sale belongs to customer number 72, there really is a customer number 72. But the data itself internally makes sense. Data recovery, what happens if we're right in the middle of writing some data to the disk and there's a catastrophic hardware failure or lightning strikes and knocks something out? We've got to be able to make sure that we can recover from that. We don't ever lose data. It's the responsibility of the database engine. So data definition and data manipulation, in other words, creating the data structures, putting data into, pulling data out of those systems. And the thing that relational database management systems spend most of their time doing, 99% of their time doing, is just answering questions. And so, we've got applications that will say, hey, I need to be able to have access to a particular customer record. Well, that's a query. And that's the database management saying, oh, you want customer number 72? Here's the information about customer number 72. Maybe it's an ad hoc query that a manager is asking, hey, I'd like to see all the, show me customers who have purchased a printer in the past 6 months who have not also purchased paper. We figured if they're buying a printer, they're probably needing some paper and they're not buying it from us. That's an opportunity. Maybe we could offer them some kind of a discount. And so we want to have some kinds of queries that can end up being pretty complex. And that's the responsibility of the engine, to be able to answer questions about the data. Now, we've got front-end software. I probably didn't see this movie. I don't know if you did. You were kids. Actually, you were probably not even born when this movie came out. So this is Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. And in this, we have Scotty here, the chief engineer, who's trying to make a deal with this guy right here to be able to get a whole bunch of plexiglass. For whatever reason, they need plexiglass. It's big plexiglass they need, as they've come back to the 1980s, from whatever century Star Trek, it takes place in. And he's going to give him the formula for transparent aluminum in exchange for a bunch of this plexiglass. And so he says, well, here, why don't you just use the computer? And of course, this computer here is a Mac 2 or something. I mean, it's pretty early technology. And he starts off trying to address it with a vocal interface, and the computer just, doesn't respond. And so Dr. McCoy here sees the mouse and picks it up and says, oh, maybe you need this. And he picks it up and treats it like a microphone. And he's a pretty clueless user of the technology here in the 20th century. But he then, is our computer user, and there's this other kind of software separate from the database engine that we refer to as the application software or the front end software, and it is responsible for interacting with the user. However clueless that user may be, the responsibility of this software is to be able to organize the data and display it to the user in a way that it makes sense to them, and to be able to collect what the user needs in terms of the database. So if the user is trying to ask some questions about the database, it's the responsibility of the front end to be able to give them an interface that they can do that with. And so front end software then is responsible for everything about input and output. So displaying, how does it look? When we talk about the data that's stored in the database, there's no color, there's no font for that data, it's just data. But ultimately, that has to be shown in some kind of color and font and alignment and everything. And that's all what the front end application then does. Might do some sorting of the data as well, although sorting is something that can be done by the engine as well. But the idea is anything that the user interacts with, that is front end software. When we put these together, these pieces together, we have like the database approach to managing, like to doing systems development, where we say there's clear distinctions here, where we say, wow, there's front end software the user works with, and it has to be able to communicate with the engine. The engine then has local, direct, fast access to the data so that it can send back the request. So suppose that we're asking for data about, give me a list of customers that meet some criterion. Like maybe we've got 2 million customers in our database. There's only 17 that meet the criterion that I've specified. So in this case, the front end then collects the request, and somehow that request gets sent to the engine. The engine then very, very quickly looks through all 2 million records and says, okay, I found the ones that meet the requirement, and it sends back just the 17 that it works with. We don't ever want the front end software kind of reaching out and dealing with the data directly. And so this is it's like the way that we do modern application development, these two very separate pieces of software. So when we say database engine, how many of you could name one database engine, at least one? If you can, just call it out. I know database engine, it is called, so Microsoft has a product called SQL Server, spelled SQL Server. In fact, when you see those three letters, SQL, in any context, you should probably say them SQL. And do you want to know the reason? It's kind of an interesting reason that we say those three letters SQL. SQL or structured query, it stands for structured query language. Is a language that was invented for dealing with asking questions about data stored in relational database management systems by a company called IBM. Have you heard of them? IBM. Yeah. So they made this language in the 1970s, and they called it SQL. SEQUEL stood for Structured English Query Language. So SEQUEL, like the language is actually SQL. That's the name of the language. And then some other company, kind of upstart company, comes into the relational database management space, and they made a language that was almost exactly the same. And what did they call it? They called it SQL, the same name. And IBM's like, you can't do that. That's our trademark. You can't do that. And kind of ultimately it goes to court, and it's like, oh, you know what? That's just you really can't just trademark a word in the English language like that. Or if you can, you didn't do it right. And so IBM loses the case. And so what do? They change the name of their language to something that they can trademark. What did they change it to? SQL. They changed the name of the language without changing the language at all. And so when you read those three letters, SQL, and you say SQL, what you're saying is I have been doing this, database management, since the 1970s. I've been doing this so long that I know what this language was really called when it started. Even though that is decades before you were born, that's what you're saying. And it's it's really funny because you look at the product from Microsoft. In fact, I think it's even up here on the next the next slide. Yeah. So Microsoft SQL Server. If you talk to anyone at Microsoft, how do they pronounce it? They pronounce it SQL Server. That's just the way it is, even though that's not the way it's spelled. Okay. So in this case, what we're going to do today is we are going to say, all right, we've got Microsoft SQL Server. That is a database engine. This one's running in the cloud, one that came with some data hosting package that I purchased years ago and continue to pay entirely too much every year to maintain. mostly just for this day. I'd hate to have to restructure how I'm doing this day in class. That's going to be our back end, and our data is going to be managed by that somewhere there in the cloud. I don't even know where it is. Maybe it's in, somewhere near Surprise, Arizona. I think it is. I think it's in Scottsdale or something, so pretty close. But we're going to then use Excel as the front end. And so we're going to have Excel sending a structured query language statement over to Microsoft SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server is either going to send back the data, or going to send back an error message saying couldn't do that for whatever reason, or it's going to say, depending on what we asked, maybe we're not asking for data, we're telling it to change something over there. It'll send back a message saying it was successful or not successful. And so this is kind of high level, kind of how database systems work together and what we're about to do today. Questions here? Show me how comfortable you are on what we just covered, 0 to 5. Seems to make sense. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4. Excellent. All right. So let's start off by going to this next link, this web-based SQL or SQL environment. Now this will take you on to and this is just a website that I built just for teaching structured query language. I think when I got I bought the, the plan to be able to host data and have a database available up there. Oh, hey, you get a free domain name, with this. And at the time, like when I did this, my kids and I were doing historic baking at the Colonial Heritage Festival, right? So if we look right here at the baker, that's me. And there's, these getting bigger, there's the family, right? We got the wood-fired brick oven in the back, and he's now married and has a kid. This is a while ago. But anyway, oh boy, what do I want? What domain name do I want? And apparently I thought what I want more than anything else is a domain name called Colonial Bakehouse, even though it didn't have anything to do with what I was doing on the side. I thought I might do something with that someday. I never did. But that's the free domain name that came with the site. So that's why we're at colonialbakehouse.com to do structured query language. It's not a good answer, but that's what it is. So here's the idea. So this now, in fact, if we think about let's see, I close the presentation. I close the presentation, but if you think about this, now what we've got is we've got the front end that's running right here, partially in the browser and partially on the web server this browser is interacting with. And the database management system, SQL Server, is running somewhere else there in the cloud. And so I've got then this structured query language statement. Select star from customer, and I will submit and income the results from that table. Now, star says, show me how comfortable, first of all, show me how comfortable you are with structured query language. Have you had 0 experience with it, or you've had a little bit of experience? So some of you are like 5, some of you are 3s, and some of you, a bunch of you are 0s. Okay. So structured query language is like the default language that we use for pulling data out of database management systems. Definitely, if it's a relational database management system, which, by the way, just means our data are organized in tables. Relation is the mathematical word for table. And so if our data is organized in tables, technically that's a relational database management system. And categorically, this is the language you use to interact with that. Now, beginning in the mid 2000s, so 2002, 3, 4, 5, we started to get real movement on a new kind of database management that's sometimes called NoSQL. Have you heard of it? Haven't, but it's like database management that's kind of came after relational database management. The thing about relational database management, it started in the 1970s. And at the time when we're making relational database management, how many computers might your company have? If your company had a computer at all, it's 1972. How many computers did your company have? 1. It's ludicrous to think that you would have 2 computers at your business. Why would you do that? Because your computer takes up a whole room. And if you needed more capacity, you don't make another computer, you add capacity to that computer. And so this is where relational database management was born, and it really grew up in the idea that, well, maybe we'll have more than 1 computer at our company eventually in the 1980s and 90s, but we've still got 1 that's running our database. We get to the 2000s, and we now have systems that are so big that our biggest computers can't handle them. Who are the companies that run into this first? If you were to guess, which company runs into this problem first in the world, who is it? Google. Yeah, Google is among the first, if not the very first. In fact, the 2 competitors at the time are Google and another company you may have heard of called Yahoo. Not Facebook. Facebook doesn't even start till 2004. So Google's already trying to solve this problem by the time Facebook comes around, but they will become another big player in this space. And they're saying, listen, we go to companies like Oracle, like the big brother of database management, and they just can't provide systems that can do what we needed to do. And so they made some very, very different ways to manage data, where instead of saying we've got one machine that manages it all, we've got a whole cluster of machines. We might have 1,000 different computers working together to be able to manage our data. And it is a completely different way to think about it. It goes under by the term NoSQL, but regardless of whether you're using relational or post-relational / NoSQL databases, the very common language is still structured query language. And the reason is that in these new kind of upstart databases, they're trying to make people that are familiar with existing relational technology comfortable. And so they come up with languages that are, if not exactly structured query languages, are really similar to structured query language, so that old relational database folks are comfortable in their new system and they're ready to move across to this new kind of managing data. But we'll be sticking with relational database management. And it's primarily because the things that I'm expecting you to do with Excel and VBA with databases will probably be working with relational databases, which is still almost entirely where like internal company data are stored. So in terms of sales systems, a lot of them are moving into these kind of higher capacity systems, but this is where we are now. So just a couple of things here. When I say select, this is this is saying, hey, I want you to show me something. And the star says, show me all columns, but I don't have to show all columns. I could just say I want first name, comma, last name, city, state from customer. And then if I execute that query, then our front end sends that request to the engine. The engine looks across all the data, says, here's the records that meet the criteria, and then send it back. So customer then is the name of the table that I'm getting this data from, but I can restrict which records that I want. So I don't want to see all of these. I can put another clause on this statement called the where clause that just puts a restriction. I'm only interested in those where the state is equal to Utah. So when I do a string literal in structured query language, I use single quotes instead of double quotes in VBA. But now when I execute that, it will show me only customers who are in the state of Utah. It's beyond what I want to do right now. We may do an example of this even by the end of class, but I've got another table here called my sale table. It's a record of all of my sales. Select star from sale. And so I can see that on a particular date, there was a sale for a particular customer. Well, I could join these two tables together and actually say, instead of just showing separate sets of data for sale and customers, I could say, oh yeah, just go find, at this point for this row, go find customer number 1134, get the first name, last name, city, and state, and bring that and put it right here on this line. It's more than I want to do with the initial query, but just realize that these queries, these statements written in structured query language, then are how we interact with the data. We can change the sort order, order by. There's another clause called order by. So select from, where, order by. These are the major clauses in the language. Order by, and then give it the name of a column to order by, city. And so now these are alphabetically ordered by city. I can tell it to go in descending order. So show my highest ones at the top and then come down the other direction. When IBM made structured query language, this was their plan. We are going to make a language that is so simple, even a manager could use it. That was the plan. This was like a language that managers could like self-serve to be able to pull the data out that they want. And the truth is, for really easy questions, that's true. If you don't have to join two tables together, you're working on a single table, I think that's available for the manager to kind of ask the question for herself. But queries end up getting really, really pretty complex. And so generally speaking, they're still the domain of more technical users. And by more technical users, I mean people like you here in this class. So that's the idea. So now our plan is, so we've just kind of seen this ability to have an arbitrary query written in some front-end environment, sent off to the engine and get the data back. I want to be able to do that from Excel now. That's our next step. So let's go ahead and give it a go. So I'm going to go ahead and come back over to Excel. This is the workbook that I downloaded for today. If I come back to our blog, so dbread.xlsm, download it, unblock it so that the macros can work. But first, what we're going to see, before we look at this with VBA, we're going to see there are some tools just built into Excel that let me go pull data from a database. So let's take a look at these right now. So I'm going to come to the Data tab, and I'm going to come to this first tool over here, Get Data. I'll drop that down, and one of my options is from a database. Should be no surprise that top of the list is Microsoft's database. So we'll use that from SQL Server. Now, if you're working on the Mac version of Excel, this might be something similar. They do have now native built into the Excel version for Mac, the ability to reach out to a Microsoft SQL Server database natively. What we're going to do through code in VBA, you won't be able to do on your Mac because it relies on objects that are only available on Windows. But like this part, I'm not sure how the menu structure is similar, but you can just go and pull this data in from SQL Server. So I'm going to go ahead and select this from a database, SQL Server. And by the way, there's other ones over here. So IBM's DB2, Oracle, these are ready. Sybase, really? Sybase, Teradata? Wow, that's some nice choices here. We're going to choose SQL Server. And say, great, you want to connect on a SQL Server, you're going to have to give us some information. So the first thing is, what is the server that you're going to want to interact with? So our server, and this is then going to be something, either an IP address or a host name that is going to get me directly to a particular machine that's running a database server. And so in our case, this is colonialbakehouse.com. colonialbakehouse.com. Now, optionally here, we can provide a database to work with. So when we say the server, this is the computer that's running my database management software. I might have dozens or hundreds of databases running on this version of SQL Server, on this instance of SQL Server. So which database do I actually want to connect up to? And I'm going to go ahead and connect up to the same one that we're working with on that web interface. It is called Red, R-E-D-CAT, C-A-T. Red Cat. Red Cat is Red Cat Shoes is a fictional company that I invented to be able to talk about database management with my students. They sell shoes in an online context. So if you look at their products, they're all shoes. They've got sizes, colors, and we've got orders for them and so forth. Okay. I'm going to say okay. I don't think these have advanced options I need. Command timeout, SQL statement. I don't need those. Advanced options go away. I'm going to say okay. Now, this may ask you for some, oh no, I think this is coming up. How many of you got to this part? Oh, it's a miracle. How many of you are trying to get to this part and it's like spinning, not getting to this part? Anyone? No? So first thing that we have to realize is that we got to make sure that the traffic can actually be routed to this database server. I'm going to give you some more background on this. What database are you connected to? Oh, you're on Mac. Red Cat. I mean, what network are you connected? Are you on Eduroam? Do you know? Click on the little icon there. And oh, you're connecting. No, I think you're on Eduroam. That should be okay. Colonial Bakehouse. Oh, it's asking you for authentication yet. So it's a little bit different here. We're getting to authentication here in just a minute. I think it'll be okay. Okay. So you're probably just used to thinking, here's the internet and it works. I want to express one more idea to you in this space. So whenever you connect on to any kind of server on the internet, if it's a web server, it takes more than just the IP address to get there. So let me kind of come back here to colonialbakehouse.com. And I'm just going to take this host name. I'm going to open up a command prompt. So in Windows, I'm going to use, you can either use CMD or you could use PowerShell. P-O-W-E-R shell. But just something to be able to get to a command prompt. And I am just going to ping. So ping is or if you're on Windows, you can do this with terminal. So if you've got terminal, open up terminal, these same commands will work. So I'm just going to ping bakehouse.com. So ping is a network command, it's a little program that just says, hey, I want to know if that server is there and responding. And I don't really care if it responds, but the first thing it's going to do is it's going to actually convert this host name, which the internet does not know how to route, to an IP address. So a host name is just a human readable form of an IP address. And that's going to say, when you're talking to colonialbakehouse.com, you're actually talking to a machine that has this IP address, 143.95.66.184. That number, like when I'm trying to communicate with that, that's a number that can be routed. So my machine talks to its gateway and says, hey, I'm trying to talk to this server, 143.95.66.184. My gateway, like the piece of network hardware that my computer talks to, says, well, I don't really know where that is or how to contact it, but I know someone else who might know. And so it talks to however it's connected. And ultimately, we go from router to router on the internet. And finally, someone goes, oh, yeah, I know just right where that is. And so that command will go through several kind of hops to be able to get there. And that gets me then connected onto that machine. But that machine may have lots of different services that are running. It could be running a web server. It could be running a mail server. It could be running a remote access server, like a secure shell server. Could be doing an FTP server. Could be doing a database server. There's lots of different servers that can be running. And so getting to a machine is not enough. You have to be able to say, which port is this machine, is that service listening for on that machine? Which means that anytime that I go to a web page, let me just come to like byu.edu. Now, I'm specifying the host name. The host name gets transferred into translated into an IP address. So I can be able to find that machine. But when I do this, I am talking to on a particular port. And the way I specify, you don't probably never think of the port when you're on a web page. But here's the port. This is going to be listening on, this server is listening on port 443, I think. So like in a browser, I'm going to say hostname : 443. Now, when I hit enter on this, let me go home and then paste that same, I lost it, : 443. If it finds it on 443, we should be able to get there straight away. Yeah, it took me right there and said, you know what, we don't really need to show that port number because that's the default port number when I'm talking to something on, over HTTPS. If it's just something on HTTP, it would be port 80. Those are the default ports. You don't have to specify. I don't have to say it. My browser knows enough to put it on. If I tried to go to some different port, if I said, hey, I'm trying to talk to that same server, but I'm on a different port, 442, and hit enter, a browser is going to go, well, you're trying to talk on port 442, so I'm going to talk to that server and tell it I'm communicating on 442, and it's just waiting. My browser is waiting for a response. It's just waiting for a response. And so when I'm working with like any server, whether it's a web server, and this all happens in the background, you don't have to think about it. So do I even know a site that operates on a port besides the default ports? I don't have one on the top of my head. But anytime I'm working with a database server, it's the same thing. Now, I didn't specify a port working with SQL Server here because there's a default port when I'm trying to work with SQL Server. It happens to be 1433. That's the port number that it works on. But this front end says you didn't give me a port number, so you must mean the default port. And so that's good. So the point is that when you're connecting to any service, and you often do need to specify the port when you're connecting with a database, so it's not just enough to know the machine, You have to know the port that the database server on that machine is listening for traffic on. And something really interesting happened in 2001 dealing with Microsoft SQL Server and its port 1433. I hesitate to ask how many of you were born in 2001, because there are probably a few of you here who weren't born by then, which makes me feel bad because I was already a professor when that happened. Oh, it was 2003. It wasn't 2001, it's 2003. So what happened is that someone wrote a worm, a piece of malware that took advantage of a vulnerability in Microsoft SQL Server. And if you sent a malformed request to SQL Server, then it would infect that machine with this malware. And what would that malware do? It would just, at random, pick an IP address and try to communicate with that IP address on port 1433, trying to find another Microsoft SQL Server to infect. This was a patch. This was a vulnerability that was known. Microsoft, about 6 months before this, had released a patch to fix this. But back in the early 2000s, software patches did not get installed automatically ever. You had to have a database administrator going, yep, we got to patch the server. So we have to take the server offline, update the software, put it back online. And the truth is, most of the SQL servers that were running that had this vulnerability, the people who were running them had no idea that they were even exposed to the internet. And so they thought they were safe. They didn't realize that their servers were listening for internet traffic. Well, what happened within the first 40 minutes or so, 75,000 computers on the internet that were running SQL Server got infected. And what was it doing? Each machine, as fast as it could, was randomly guessing an IP address and trying to communicate on port 1433. There was so much traffic. This is like the day the internet broke. Like there was so much port 1433 traffic, you couldn't route any other kind of traffic. It just completely overwhelmed the infrastructure of the internet. Let's suppose you were at home and you can't get to the internet. You've got, you're paying someone to provide you access to the internet. What would you do? You try to go to your whatever page you want to go to, and it just won't answer. And anywhere you go, it won't answer. What do you do? What would you do? Take the day off. That's what we did at work. We took the day off. But if you're at home and you want to get to the internet, what would you do? You are paying someone to connect you to the internet. Please tell me what you would do. You would call the company you were paying good money to give you the internet because your internet connection is broken. You have no idea the whole internet is broken. And so pretty quickly after this worm launches, like every ISP, internet service provider, is like flooded with calls saying, hey, I'm paying you guys good money. How come this isn't working? And they're immediately looking, trying to, well, what's wrong? And they're checking and they go, oh my gosh, we normally have this tiny little trickle of 1433 traffic, and it's now 99.9% of everything that we're getting. What did they do? They put little rules in place that said if a request comes into us that says 1433, ignore it. Just dump it off. The way the internet works is you've got lots of people, individual owners of hardware that are connected up to a common network, and they're working together to route traffic from one end to the other. And so it took about 24 hours for enough ISPs to ignore 1433 traffic for like normal web traffic to be able to come through. Those of us who were working, depending on the internet, had wished it'd been 3 or 4 days. We could have had a better vacation. But as a result, like if you're an internet service provider and you went through this terrible ordeal and you finally put this rule in place that ultimately brought the internet back to life, what would it take for you to take that rule off? What would it take for you to say, you know what, we're going to start routing port 1433 traffic again? What could possibly compel you to do that? Like a really, really important customer says, I really, really need it, then you might consider it. But the truth is that those rules stayed in those network routers for years, like until the hardware was replaced. And so for years after this, after 2003, you could not reliably route port 1433 traffic on the internet. You just couldn't. And so it would, so you had, if you were setting up SQL servers, as I was at that time, did I have one that got infected? I don't know. I might have. then you had to set it up on some non-standard port to be able to communicate. That's probably more than you wanted to hear about like communicating with databases. We just picked the default port. Now, it's now saying, what credentials do you want to use to be able to be authenticated there? Now, Microsoft SQL Server is like wired to be able to use your Windows credentials. Like you're logged in on your Windows machine with some username. It really wants to say, you know what, we're just going to use that username to give you permissions. Well, it turns out the Microsoft SQL Server that's running in the cloud at colonialbakehouse.com has no idea what your username is, and it's not giving you any permissions based on your Windows username. And so we're not going to use Windows credentials to authenticate. We're going to come and choose database credentials. So you got to have a username to put in here. And the username, I'm going to put this on Notepad so you can see it a little bit bigger. So the username that you're going to want for this is redcat_user. I think. Let me just check. I have this in the code. Yeah, redcat user. And the password is THOMAS_1775. And so that's the username and password that we're going to use to authenticate here. So the username is redcat_user. And I'm going to paste the password in because I'm a bad typist, as you know. And then I'm going to say connect. Oh, we're unable to connect to the data source using an encrypted connection. Well, that's okay. Do you want to use an unencrypted connection? Sure, I'm okay with unencrypted. Like I just published the username and password on a video. I'm okay with it being unencrypted traffic. And then that's going to bring up this navigator that says, these are all the tables that you have access to on this server. So there's a table called California Women's Shoes. There's one called Employee Brief. That means a short list of employees, not about employees' underwear or anything. Like list of customers, that's the one we saw before. So I could select that one. Yeah, there's the same customer data. Or here's the list of employees, inventory item. So maybe I'll just choose, I'll go ahead and choose the same one, customer. Yes. Username and password coming up. So no VBA so far, just working on the interface, just like a built-in tools to Excel to be able to reach out and pull data in. So it looks like we have some options to do some kind of transformation of the data. We could like maybe concatenate, instead of having first and last name in separate fields, we could join those together into one column. We're going to skip that and we're just going to click on load. It's making now a database query similar to the web query that we made. Remember when we made a web query, when the data changed on the website and we refreshed the web query, it would bring in the current data. This is the same thing. This is now a database query. And so if this data were to change and we were to refresh it, come back to data and say refresh all, it would make a request back to that server and bring in the current data. And what do we have? I think there's something 4,000 or so customers here. And so we brought that data in. And so in this case, we are using Excel as the front end to a Microsoft SQL Server database. This is a read-only connection. If we change the data here, which we can say, by the way, Portsmouth is no longer in Virginia, we moved it to New Mexico. That doesn't try to change the data in the back end. So we've read the data here, it's a copy of the data, do what we want. If we say, refresh this, it's going to move that F2 from New Mexico right back to New Hampshire? No, Vermont, Maine, I forgot where it was. It was in Virginia. So yeah, so this is one-way read only, but that's the idea of the tools, just the data tools from Excel. Any questions here? Anyone trying to get it that didn't get it? And do you want a hand?
Like at the beginning, is it?
So
Imported some of the rows?
oh, I see.
So now I'm opening it back up, or is there a better way to?
Let's go. I'll go through that again. And I see that there's something that mine showed by default that yours didn't show. So let's take a look at it again. I'm going to kind of bring us up to the point where I saw several of you being. So get data from database. Oops. SQL Server. Server is Colonial Bakehouse. In fact, if you're going to specify a port, you do it with a comma and put the port number here. But you shouldn't need to do that. Database Redcat. So I'm using database credentials. I'm putting in my username and password. And connecting. Maybe we don't specify it with a comma anymore. So let me cancel that. Oh, I didn't mean to cancel the whole thing. EOLONIALBAKE house.com. COLONILA back. COLONIAL. Thank you. Why didn't I have to specify the user? Remember my username and password before? Anyway, this is where I was trying to get. That's good. So I think for many of you, you have more than one database shown here. Is that right? So you just need to expand the one that is colonialbakehouse.com Redcat, and that should give you the same set. So that would look different. Now, it should be that if I come here and choose customer, I don't think this is showing everything yet. This is just a preview. It's truncated. I want to see where you are. There's either getting something different where you are on this. You're getting to the customer table now? Okay. And then when you say load, that should bring that table in, put it onto a new tab. And now I've got 2 copies of my customer table, which I don't really want. I'll delete one of those. By the way, having some comfort level with structured query language is like an incredibly valuable skill for you. Let me tell you what's going to happen in your career. You're going to be, assigned to some project, or you're going to need some data from like the corporate data store. And if you don't know structured query language, you're going to talk to someone at the Office of Information Technology for your company. And you're going to say, hey, I understand you're the guy or you're the person who's going to be able to help me get some data from the database. And the person will be like, yeah, just send me an email with what you need. And so you're going to spell out what you need in an email. You're going to send it to them. And what is that person going to do with that email? If you were to guess, what would you guess? The person is going to ignore that email. Even though he just told you to send it, he's going to ignore. Why? Because he wants to find out if you're really serious about this data, because it's work that he would prefer not to do. And so it's going to take you 24 hours to 48 hours before you decide, I'm going to follow up, because he should at least acknowledge the request. So now you follow up, and that's when he says, oh, okay, you're serious about this. I'm going to do it. So that person will respond back. It's okay, I'm going to get to it. This is not his highest priority. And when's he going to get to it? After you bug him again. And then he'll say, oh, yeah, I should be able to get that for you by tomorrow. And by tomorrow, he will give you a response, and you'll look at the data, and you'll immediately know, this is not the data I asked for. And so you respond back to him and say, this is what I needed. You gave me this, and what I really needed was this. And you'll go through another cycle like that. And finally, that person, maybe this next time, maybe 2 or 3 more times later, he will actually send you the data that you need, that you asked for. At that point, you will realize, oh, I didn't ask for what I really needed. Now that I see this, I need something else. And it can take a really long time to actually get the data that you're after when you've got some other person in the middle between you and your data whose first priority isn't getting that data for you. And so at some point, if you can say, listen, can you just give me read access to the data that I need? It might take you a little longer to get that than to get the data that you needed in the first place. But then you can ask your own questions after that, and you can dramatically reduce the cycle time. It's a big deal. And you might think that this story I've told you is somehow fanciful. It is not. That's the normal way that it works. If you have someone that gives you the data that you need the first time, that's really, really unusual. Okay. So at this point, we have just specified the whole table. We're going to see through VBA how we can specify a query to restrict the data, join the data together, and so forth. But what we've seen at this point is just getting the data through the front end. You ready to do it through VBA? Let's go give it a shot. So I'm going to just go ahead and open up the code. So developer, Visual Basic. There should be one module in here. I've got a sub-procedure called DB1. And we'll take a look at this code here in just a minute. But the first thing is that we have to do something that I don't think we've done yet. Maybe we've done it once. And so most of the objects that we've worked with, when we said, oh, we're going to work with some existing object here in Excel, we've worked with objects like workbooks and worksheets and ranges and charts and shapes. And those are all things that are like built into Excel. They're like objects that already exist. And sometimes we've created our own objects, we've created a new sheet or created a new workbook, but the ability to interact with that object is native to Excel. It's saying, you know what, you're using VBA here in Excel. We think these are the normal things you're going to want to work with. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of other objects that we could work with and manipulate from VBA that aren't like built-in native to Excel. And interacting with databases is one of those. And so before we can just reach out and make objects or instantiate objects to work with, we have to first say, bring in the library, bring in the tools that know how to work with this object. And here's how we do that. From VBA, and so we're saying here, you go to Tools, References, and then you pick the object library that you want to work with. And so I'm going to do Tools. I have to make sure that I'm in break mode. You should be in break mode. We haven't run any code yet, or outside of break mode, so make sure you hit the stop first. Tools, References, and these are all of the objects that we have the ability to manipulate through VBA that we have access to on this machine. It's a bunch of them. Well, I'm trying to find the M's because I'm looking for Microsoft ActiveX data access objects. Microsoft ActiveX, here it is. The Microsoft ActiveX data objects library. We got 2.0, 2.1, 2.5, 2.6, 2.8, 6.1. The truth is, any one of these would work for me. I'm going to go ahead and choose the most recent one, 6.1, and it is not enough to highlight it, to select it. I've got to check the little box next to it. And that says this workbook is going to import the code necessary to be able to work with these Microsoft ActiveX data objects. And so when I close this workbook, open it again somewhere else, email it to my buddy, at Notre Dame University. He'll open that up, and that code will already be in the workbook. It will already be connected. So, but if I'm starting a new workbook, I've got to go and specify, I want this workbook to have access to the Microsoft ActiveX data objects library. Once I've done that, I get access to these types. So if I'm looking at my code here, I've got a couple of strings. CS stands for connection string. That's going to be the information we need to connect onto the database. SQL stands for structured query language. That's going to be our query. And now I'm making a connection object of this type that's available to me because I've added the reference to the Microsoft ActiveX data access library. So it's going to be an ADODB connection. ADODB stands for ActiveX Data Objects Database. So this is a database connection. So we've got two different objects here because one is going to be an object that gets us connected to that server. And we'll have to specify the same things that we specified. It's going to be a Microsoft SQL Server. We're going to have this host name. We're going to communicate on, well, it'll be the default port. We're going to specify a database there. In fact, that's what our connection string is. So this connection string is just a string. It's a string that our connection object knows how to interpret. And it says we're connecting to SQL Server. The database is going to be Redcat, and the server is going to be colonialbakehouse.com. We then are going to call the open method of our connection object. Right? CN is this connection object. We're calling the open method, and we are giving it the connection string. So we're saying, hey, connection, open up a connection to a Microsoft SQL Server database. Which one? Over, running on this host name and connect to this database. And by the way, pass this username and this password to authenticate. If everything goes well to that point, and just put a stop right here. Stop. I'm going to run this code here, and if I get to that, then without error, I'm connected. I've successfully connected on to the database. I haven't asked it for any data yet. I've just opened up the channel of communication between my instance of Excel and that server running in the cloud. Next then is to tell it what data I want. And so here I've got select star from customer as just a string. And now I'm going to call the open method of the record set object. I'm going to give it the SQL that I want to execute and the connection that I want to execute that on. So this is simple. One connection, one record set. I could have multiple record sets on that same connection, and I could have multiple connections open at the same time. I could open up a connection to an Oracle database and to a SQL Server database, and I could be pulling data out of my SQL Server database and pushing it over to my Oracle database. I could have different connections, different record sets. This is a simple instance, just one of each. But I do have to tell my record set which connection I'm working on. And so if I just step through this, it looks like I've got that connection, but I'm not doing anything with it yet. So it's going to close the connection or close the record set and then close the connection. But if that runs without error, it's a good sign. We're actually talking to that server and we're getting data back. Now I'd like to be able to do something with the data. But is there anyone who needs a hand before we move on? Like it worked out okay? If you're trying, it looks like it worked. Okay. So I want to start off just by doing the same thing through VBA that we did by bringing this data in through the data menu. So I think I'm going to work on, why don't we go ahead and insert a worksheet for this as well. Oh, lost my code. So let me go ahead and dim S as a worksheet. And then we'll set S equal to worksheets.add. Dim S. It's probably hard for you to see the S all the way over there. I'll darken that S in for you so you can see it. Okay. So that'll give me a new worksheet. I'm going to go ahead and get the connection. Let me get rid of my stop here. In fact, I'll just move my stop down to here. Then I'll have this record set open. Now, database management systems are meant to deal with huge amounts of data. Like, could I run a query that could bring back more records than Excel could handle? Oh yeah, Excel can only handle 1.04 million rows. And what'd you say? 1 million rows, is that a lot of data? That's not a trivial amount of data, but it's not a lot of data in today's world of data. So, but I can very easily bring back more data than would fit into memory on this computer. And so when I say open this record set, it does not bring back to me all of the records that are here. It brings back one record. And I will tell it when I'm ready for it to get the next record. So a record set, obviously, let me work with one record at a time. Make a loop to kind of bring them all and bring them quickly. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and run this code up to this stop, and we're going to poke around at this record set then for just a minute. Okay, so I've run all the way to where stop is after the record set open. And let me just ask a question of my RS. So RS is an object, it has a property called fields. So fields is, so my record set has one record in it, and it's got all the fields from that table. So if I think about the fields that I had in that table, where did my query go? So I've got first name, last name, city. Let me look at a field. Let me look at the first name field. First name, and it's an object as well, and I'm interested in the value of that field. Oh, that needs to be in quotes because it's a string literal. That tells me James. Let me go ahead and execute that same query over here so I can get a peek at it. I can just copy it from here. Select star from customer. Copy, paste, submit. So yeah, there's James. If I ask for the customer ID, I should see 12. Now, this is a collection, named collection, so I can refer those things by their name, but how else should I be able to refer to elements of a collection besides their name? Yeah, by their number. So let's look at the 0th one, and we'll see that's 12, so we're 0 based. The 1 should be the first name, 2 should be the last name. So I've got access to that. I've only got one record to work with at a time, but I've got that there. But besides the value, I can also ask for the name of the column. We've got the name property. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin just by making a loop that will go and print all the names on the, wherever we are from the active cell. So wherever we just inserted a sheet. So we're going to put it in the upper left-hand corner of the sheet. Okay, so let's just do this. In fact, let me go ahead and declare for myself another variable. We'll just declare dim x as an integer. I can imagine myself having a table with more than 255 columns in it. I cannot imagine a table with more than 32,000 columns in it. So I think integer will be just fine for this. 4x equals 0 to the upper boundary of, oh no, see, this is a collection. This is not an array. If it was an array, I'd use upper boundary. It's a collection, so how do I count the collection? Got to count property. So if there are 5 elements in my collection, the indices will be 0 through 4. So I'm going to subtract 1 off of this. And then I will just say s dot cells row number 1, column number x plus 1 dot value is equal to the name of that, whatever column that is. So when x is 0, I will be reading the name of the number 0 column, putting it into row 1, column 1. And then next time through the loop, row 1, column 2, we'll get first name, then last name, and so forth. So if I run this, mixed. Oh, that's the Southwestern version. Fields. Oh, not fields2.count, fields.count. And we'll go ahead and bring my sheet up, and we'll run that. And we can see it put in customer ID, first name, last name, city, state, zip, and those others are there. Okay, so far so good. Now, let me just go ahead and write the data in. The loop for the data is going to look really similar. So similar, I'm going to copy it. So now, row 1, the row that I'm going to want, let me go ahead and set this to 2 for the moment. So row 2, same column, instead of the name, I'm going to put the value. And so that should write my first set of values in there on row 2. I'll need to generalize this here in just a bit. Let's just go ahead and bring that in. And it looks like we then have brought that data, in. I think I would like this like auto fit. We're gonna come back and put a whole loop in here. We're gonna put like more loop around this. But now why don't I just do this? Why don't I say, let's see, the brand new worksheet. Let me do this. I will just say s.usedRange, so all the range that has data, dot entire column, dot autofit. And I think that's it. And I think that will just auto-fit that data. Yeah. So you do have to go all the way. You have to have a whole column to be able to auto-fit. You can't auto-fit a range unless you've got the whole column. So from my used range, I'm asking for the whole column that corresponds to that, and then I can auto-fit it. But now what I want to do is saying, hey, it's not enough to just get one row of data. I want to get all of those rows of data. Let me do this. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to call a method of my record set. So rs dot, it has a method called move next. So when I execute move next, it is going to say, get the next record, right? It's connected onto that database and it's got the first record. I now just told it to get the next record. What happened to my first record in the record set? Poof, gone. It got overwritten in the record set object with the second record. So now if I was to change this to row 3 here, and then go back and run that loop again, it should bring in my next record. So what I want to do is I want to generalize this now so that it will go for all of them. Well, I'm going to need some variable to control where I'm looking here. So let me just declare another, better make this one a long integer. I'll call this one row as long. And we'll make another loop here. This one I'm going to make a do loop. So I'll put do down here. I'll say loop. I'm going to increment row in here. Row equals row plus 1. I've got a do loop, so I better put a do events in here as well. Just in case this gets out of control, I'll be able to break into it. I'll tab in my inner loop just a bit. I guess I'll bring these all in together. I'm going to start row off at row 1. So let me go ahead and initialize its value here to 1. And then instead of 3 here, I'm going to put row. So now the first time through this loop, row will be 1. It'll, I think I want it to be 2. I want to start off at 2. Because row 1 is getting my field names. So now I'm saying, hey, let's go on to start with row 2. We're going to go across all the fields with whatever record is there, and we'll write that in. Now we'll move ourselves down to the next row. And I'm in trouble here because I haven't advanced the record set inside my loop. And so it's just going to keep printing the same record all the way down until it got to the end of the worksheet. That would take a while. Fortunately, I had to do events in there, but I also remembered that I need to advance it. So I'm going to put my move next in here. So I'll move to my next row to write the data out. This will move me to the next record set. And so let me execute that one more time here. And if I'm off, if I duplicate a record here, it's not really a big deal. But now I'm going to come through here. And that's going to be, I don't think I've defined what row is. Yeah, I need a way out of the loop still. Let me just see what row is real quick. I don't think I've given row a value. So let me set row equal to 4. Try this again. Yeah, and it's bringing in the next record. And then we'll go get the next one. Looks pretty good. But you're right, I haven't let myself out of the loop yet. Move next. So the question is, what's the difference between move next and next record set? Move next takes me to the next record in the current record set. and rs.next record set. I had no idea. I have no idea what this does. I've never used it. Here's my guess. I'll make a guess, and then we'll go look it up and we'll find out what it is. My guess is that I could give it multiple queries. Here's the SQL, it's 3 queries. And so the record set might come back with the first one. If I say next record set, it would get the record set for the next query. That's my guess. Am I right? I don't know either. Let's go take a look. So if only we had some connection to a worldwide network of information. So record set. Next, it was called next record set. Next record set, VBA. Next record set method. Next record set method to view the data in a record set that uses compound command statement made up of separate select statements. Yeah, so you could, I never knew you could do that. Truth is, I never knew you could do that. But you can send multiple statements and then you can just iterate through them. Interesting. All right. So, I think we're in good shape. Oh no, I have to get out of the loop. Now, there's another property of a record set. We just print it, question mark, rs.eof, end of file. And that is false until I've tried to read past the end of the file. And so as long as there's another record set to get, when I say move next, end of file is false. Once I've moved to the last one and try to move past the last one, it will say, oh, end of file is now true. And so I can use that to let me out of the loop. So I'm going to do until rs.eof. Oh, let's see. It's false. Yeah, so do until rs.eof. If it's more comfortable, you can say equals true here. But of course, rs.eof is itself either true or false. You don't have to put the equals true. And it definitely makes sense to put it at the top because it's a very common thing to run a query that brings back no records. Is that an error? No, that's the answer. You know, show me the customers who have a first name of Greg and live in Wisconsin. There are no customers named Greg who live in Wisconsin. How does the database management tell me that? It sends back an empty set. And so I don't want to try to print stuff out if there's nothing to print out. So I'm going to check on the way in, make sure that they're, and if it sends back an empty set, EOF is true to start with. That would let me out immediately. Okay, so I think I should be able to run this the rest of the way and have it print that data out. Syntax error, UNTIL. And it looks like it took a little while to bring that in. How long did it take? I don't know. But the data is now here. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this the rest of the way out, get rid of my stop because I'm in pretty good shape now. Well, I am curious to know how long it took to pull that data in. So let me just do this. At the very end, debug.print now. And I'll do that at the very beginning too, and we'll see how much time elapses in between my connections. So first thing I'm going to do is print now. Then when I'm done, it's like it took 3 seconds to bring that data in. I'd like to speed that up, but so far, so good. Any questions? Okay, so 2 more things I want to accomplish in the next minutes. One, I'd like to make this kind of similar to this one that gets generated here with this is already kind of set up as a table. So that's pretty easy to do. I don't remember the code, but the code's simple code. So don't follow along with me on this one. Just get ready to type what this shows me. So I'm going to record myself. I'm going to record a macro. I'm going to record making this into a table. So insert table. That's okay. Stop recording. I'm just after that little block of code. Active sheet, list objects, add. And I'm going to just copy that to there. Okay. So after I've done my auto fit I'm going to go ahead and say, I don't have to say active sheet would work, but I'm going to say S. We've already got a sheet for it. List objects.add source range. My range here is going to be my used range. So s.used range. And I don't know what it's skipping there, but that's fine. Excel, yes. Now it says it's changed the name to table 3. That's a bad idea. I'm going to get rid of the dot name change. I'm doing something with the return value of that list. Now I'm not doing anything with the return value, so I'm getting rid of the parentheses. And so now if I run that, it should build it and give me a table that is kind of a proper table. All right, this next part, I'm going to do this pretty quickly so we're done in time today. So maybe just watch this one instead of trying to come along with it. I'm going to copy this. That's a pretty good example. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to make this one called DB2. It's exactly the same. I just want to show you a neat little property of a range right here. So instead of looping through this, I'm just going to tell the range to pull the data from the data set. So everything's the same, except I'm not going to go through this row by row, column by column. I'm just going to say s dot cells 1, the very first cell, dot like from record set. But it doesn't know that I'm going to have help getting it. So stand by just a second. Even if I say active cell, yeah, it knows what an active cell is. Oh, there's a property in here that pulls the data in straight from a record set, and I don't remember what it's called. I'm going to have to find it. But I will find it, and like as soon as I dismiss class, we'll track it down, we'll post it here, it'll be on the video. But it's one statement that says, take this range, you give it a record set, and it's copy from record set. Dot copy from record set. I give it the record set I want to copy from, RS, and I'm going to put that in there. So that range. So range S1, copy from record set RS, and that'll just dump the data into that range from that record set. Now it was taking me about 3 seconds for this to run before. Let's see how long it takes to run with this. So it dramatically has sped that up. So that might even be happening in less than a second. Yeah, see, that's happening now within the same second. So there's some extra time that it takes to iterate across the rows and columns through that record by record, and that's just sped up in this copy from record set. Now, you might be thinking that was a lot of work in VBA to be able to do the same thing that we just did from the interface. Well, yeah, that's true, but it may be that now we're in control of that data record by record. We don't want to push it to the worksheet. We want to look through it and then do something different with it. So that's where we're headed. All right, next time we get together, we're going to see how do we change data in a database from VBA, and that will be what you need for project number 5. Thanks for coming. Class dismissed. You're too kind. Thank you very much.